Greetings, this is Chris Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story. And this one is on the pages of, surprise, surprise, Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. But, as I've indicated earlier, even this magazine can and has the right to refuse a story Asimov writes if they don't deem it sufficient or worthy or whatever else. Nevertheless, we can put his name on the cover, but the cover is about another story. Table of contents merely tells us that the particular story, which is called Lest We Remember, is on page 56. So, now let's go to page 56. We've got some artwork here. Wow, it's kind of science fiction stuff. Look at that. Various people there trying to affect somebody's mind. A woman that followed his life is also kind of had an impact. I'll just leave it at that for now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what that is, but anyway, okay. There's a little blurb there. The art is by James Odberg. Okay. I like the style, James. All right. For all those of you who have been saying, when are you going to publish an Isaac Asimov story in the magazine which bears his name? Here is a brand new, never before seen anywhere Isaac Asimov story. We think it was worth waiting for. No. So do I. This is a good story, a really good, rock-solid story. I've enjoyed this story, and I didn't mind reading it for comparison purposes, both here and where it's gotten collected into the Winds of Change. The Winds of Change also has a little blurb about this story, and it's on page 168. And a little blurb like that says, alright, I'll just read it off. This is rather a unique case. Some Hollywood people insisted they wanted to do a television series to be entitled Isaac Asimov Presents. He's written enough things he probably really could. But some of these stories could be pretty outrageous, and others are probably dumb puns you probably best leave on the cutting room floor. Kind of, the title is kind of similar to Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I couldn't help but hear that echo. Alright, continuing. I doubted it very much, but I went along with it through story conferences galore. I gave them 6 ideas. They chose one. I wrote a story around that idea and called it Lest We Remember. They paid me for it generously, and then they actually wrote a screenplay based on the story, and it turned out the television people liked the result. The only step remaining was to go into production, and I was flabbergasted, for I honestly didn't believe that anything ever worked out in Hollywood. Well, I was right. With only that one last step to take, it was never taken. After a long while, I asked if I might have the story back. They granted the request with good grace, and I submitted it to George Skithers, the editor of Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. He took it, and it appeared in the February 1982 of Asimov. And you can see it is February, actually it's February 15, 1982, middle of the month. Because sometimes you got free every couple of weeks. Okay. Anyway, now I have it in this collection, and I must tell you that it's not typical of me. I wrote it with a television audience in mind, and it seems to me that as a result, the dialogue is crisper and more with it somehow. I can almost believe that every once in a while I get a faint whiff of Neil Simon. I don't know about Neil Simon. No, I did not find any textual differences. It's just that the story is collected, minus the publisher's blurb and the artwork, of course, by James Odberg. But the text seems to be, so far as I can tell, virtually identical. What was kind of fun was reading. You ever read a fictional story and it turns out there's somebody's got the name of somebody you heard of? There's a gentleman by the name of John Heath. He is the main person about whom the story is. And he's about to get married to a woman with the fairly straightforward name of Susan Collins. In 1982, that's a perfectly reasonable name. And there's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just when I see that name, I think of the somewhat Republican senator of Maine. So, anyway, no real significance there. It's just when you see a familiar name somewhere. Makes me think of a time that I was telling this kid about the cartoons of gosh, why don't I have it? Charles Addams. The ones you see in the New Yorker that the Addams family was based on. And this person, which I knew so well, his name is Charles Addams, only with one D instead of two. And it was kind of weird saying, yeah, here's some cartoons by Charles Addams, and I'm saying it to a guy named Charles Addams. that had a very strange impact. Anyway, enough of those kinds of silly and perfectly irrelevant coincidences. Let's get to the story itself. And I like this story. The man, John Heath, works for a company of pharmaceuticals. And apparently, some of the people involved in this pharmaceuticals are working on a project for some sort of a drug that increases memory recall. They put it in lab animals, and they seem to learn a whole lot quicker and better and faster and so forth than they would learn without, like how to get through a maze or do other complicated tasks that are not usual for, let us say, laboratory mice, for example. So it's like, it's time to do this on a human. We want to try it. We're going to play it careful. We're going to start with low doses, but we're going to work this through, and we're going to see how it works. Care to be the one experimented on? We need a volunteer. Later on in the story, it turns out there's actually been a few other people. They didn't say how many. One of whom is a woman. They did mention that fact. On whom they had also experimented. The nature and results of that does not seem to get discussed. Or maybe they didn't, or maybe they just gave them very low doses, or maybe there wasn't much difference. Hopefully it wasn't high doses that might do some harm of some sort. Anyway, we give him this shot, and he's perfect because he's well introduced as somebody who's just average. He'll never be spectacular. He's not brilliant. He's not stupid. He's not whatever. But he's not really smart either. He's just your total exact, dead center, and even phrases used, Joe Average, which is this is perfect. Enough that his brain will be able to handle the ability, but at the same time, it won't be like, well, he was always that smart, because he isn't always that smart. His career would already have been significantly different if he had been. So they give him his drug, and he agrees to all this, with some hesitance with that, with some recommendation of his fiancee. They're about to get married in a couple of weeks, by the way. And she's actually thinking, okay, well, let's do this. I'll stay near you just to make sure everything goes well. Very attentive, caring fiancee. She'll be a pretty good person, I dare say, through all this. They give him the injection, and maybe a day or two later, he's on the job, and somebody's thinking about some old situation, a transaction they did months ago, and he's able to go right to it. So let's see if I can find it here. Yeah. It had to do with a question about, what did we sell Rahway last spring or thereabout? What did we sell them? There's some damn question about it, and I think the details have been miscomputerized. And he just says, 42 files of PCAP. This was on April 14. Invoice number P2-20543 with a 5% discount granted on payment within 30 days. Payment in full received on May 8. Wow, that's pretty good. And it turns out he does have this intense and immensely detailed memory that enables him to put together a lot of stuff that most of us never do because we can't remember most of the stuff that goes on around us, and certainly not all at once. So he starts doing all this stuff. He's like, hey, I could really do something great here. So far, so good. But he starts seeing there's a lot of inefficiencies. He starts also, there's a lot of people that maybe the company doesn't really need. There's a lot of layers and layers of management that could be thinned out without any real loss. There's also some people there, including apparently one or two of his bosses and so forth, who have been quietly stealing from the company or doing other things that are at best wildly incompetent and at worst deliberately injurious to the well-being of the company. And he wants to do something about all this sort of thing. Well, there's a lot of folks in the company who don't like that. But before we start saying he starts becoming this great, wonderful, save-the-day savant, you get something else happening. It starts going to his head. He knows everything about what's going on. He not only remembers what he's had since he's had this drug, but all the stuff that had happened before that had been somewhere buried in his mind where maybe something could have brought it out with a lot of effort. Now he just thinks of it and, that was, invoice number 20543, such and such dates and stuff. Without any effort or very minimal effort. And he can remember so many other things that's gone on. And suddenly he knows a lot about how the office works. He knows a lot about the office politics that go on, the various struggles as everybody wants to claw their way up to the top of the heap. In fact, I think he had an earlier working title for this, something about, King of the Hill, or something along that line. Although I don't know where I saw that, but at any rate, he had wanted to be really smart, and he wanted to really end up pretty much taking over. And he made it clear, look, if you don't like me taking over, I could tell a lot of different people about what you've been doing with such and such and so and so. And he knew where all the bodies were buried. And you know what happens when somebody knows where the bodies are buried? All that does is increase one's chances of being buried with those dead bodies. So he's kind of in trouble. They kind of want to get rid of him. Sounds like they're thinking even to kill him. But it's going to his head. And he starts seeing himself as the savior of everything. And, okay, he is a competent worker now, much more competent than normal. And he would be very good for trimming out the fat. Unfortunately, a lot of that fat doesn't want to be trimmed out. Say nothing of the fact that, human beings are, on the whole, fairly inefficient beings. I'm sorry to say that's just kind of how it is. And from his perspective, it only has to be all the more obvious and open to him just how big our shortcomings really are. And therefore probably how dispensable many of us might well be, if only those remaining could be as smart as he is. And we're not. But he doesn't seem to think that detail through. So he goes to his head, and he starts almost becoming like this monomaniac. They got to do something about him. Well, they're scared that they were going to give him a drug to reverse the first drug. And even as they're about to do it, they just kind of say, come over to this office for a few minutes. We need some help with something. So, okay, I'll go there. Close the door. And now they hold him down to the chair. We're going to give you this other medicine. It's going to undo the previous. And the shock of this scares him. At the same time, his fiancée, who actually even his marriage to the fiancée was kind of not necessarily going to happen. Or at least not so soon. And I don't know, by the time he really looks at what he is with this brilliant new mind he's got, what if he thinks, this lady's got a lot of little things about her that are not, there's none of that suggested, but one can easily see that if there'd been a longer, more fleshed out story, there would have been, there'd be some hint that could come up at some point. But at any rate, he is, however, willing to put off the wedding, now when it's only about a week away because this first part's taking place over about a week or so. And he's ready to put it off a bit till things get more organized and he gets much higher in the company when he's running the show, or maybe even able to move on to another company and come in at the top and run that show or something. Then maybe he'll feel ready to get married. It's, we'll see if he's still interested in the same woman. But that doesn't happen. The woman is outside banging on the door, even as the guy's inside the office, the boss's office, where they're holding him down to a chair, getting ready to inject him with the other drug. And with all that whole situation, it scares him. The shock of the whole situation so much that it wakes him up. And he basically seems, from this point on, as if it's been undone. There's a little bit where they finally decide to go back to having the wedding as planned on the day. Somebody has a camera they've been bringing. Something doesn't work on the camera. The guy's supposed to work it. It's like, oh, I better go call the people who supplied this and see if we can fix it somehow. We're going to start this wedding soon, and I can't get this darn thing to work. And the guy looks at it, figures it all out. He's still super smart, but he just does it so subtly that he doesn't tell anybody. And the idea being, he's learned his lesson. He can be smart, but now he's going to have the intelligence and the discretion not to press his advantage, but just quietly, once in a while, very judiciously, do something that could be helpful. And that could really pull him out of that thing about being average. So I like the ending. Now, his wife sees what he did about the camera, and he says, "You do it again, and I'll skin you. As long as no one knows you still have it, no one will stop you. We'll have it all within a year, if you follow directions." Yes, dear. So he's going to do that. Anyway, it's well written, and as he said, maybe because he was trying to write for television, he did make it even more, terse, concise, tight. Whatever it is, the writing is good. It holds up. It's really a good story. I've enjoyed this story genuinely a lot. It's like, this is the kind of story we come to people like Asimov to read. Not like some of the others I've covered lately where it's like, stupid puns, or, there was that other one about 3 or 4 stories ago that was like, no. But this one is good. It's not quite up with The Last Question or Nightfall, or even such ones that I personally like Profession or Waterclap, but it's in that league. And to me, that makes this an excellent story. I very much enjoy it, and I can recommend it to anybody. Thanks for listening.